right?
Yes.
Well, welcome everybody. My name is Josh Humphreys, President, Senior Fellow at Croatian Institute, independent nonprofit research institute whose mission is to harness the power of investment for social good and ecological resilience. And I'm really pleased to welcome everyone to this special renewable energy investment roundtable that we are organizing as part of the Clean Portfolio Project. And I'm really excited to do it here at Greentown Labs in Somerville, Massachusetts, with a live webinar going on simultaneously for those of you who could not join us today in person. Greentown Labs, I can't say too much about it, but it's really exciting to do it. Our friends at Sunwell have generously hosted us here. And for those of you who are participating in the roundtable component, please plan to stick around as we're going to do a tour of what really is the nation's largest and most dynamic clean tech accelerator, including the opportunity to visit one of the solar installations that the Sunwell team have put together. So it's really exciting for those of you who are here in person. So please plan to join us for that tour, which will begin at 4:30 following a reception here. For those of you who are online, we're going to take the first hour and a half to share with you the actual in-person dialogue as part of the roundtable. And with that, what I'd like to do is to say a few words about the Clean Portfolio Project and give brief introductions of our primary participants in the roundtable, whom we're really excited to welcome as well. So the Clean Portfolio Project is an interesting initiative that emerged out of the social capital markets community in 2015. And the basic idea was that there was a gap at the time between the rapidly growing fossil fuel divestment movement and the equally rapidly growing impact investing space. And as many of you may know, SOCAP, as it's known, has become one of the largest convenings of impact investors with an annual meeting in San Francisco. And so what we did at the Institute was advise the SOCAP team on the first Divest Invest track of content at SOCAP in 2015. In 2016, we actually continued to do work within the community, formalized the work into a project that put forward a series of model educational resources, including constructing educational portfolios that would highlight that opportunities associated with divesting from fossil fuels is not just about selling, but also about investing in solutions to climate change. And to do so in ways that are diversified for the needs of the kinds of institutional investors that were beginning to make commitments to not only divest from fossil fuels, but invest in solutions to climate change. At the time, some college endowments had made commitments, and indeed in 2014, a very thoughtful group of philanthropic foundations associated with Divest Invest philanthropy had also started to make very substantial commitments, both to divest and to invest. But there was a pretty wide recognition within the field that on the invest side, that folks lacked resources to really reallocate positions. And so our advice within this context was to take a total portfolio approach to thinking about gaps and opportunities in the climate solutions investing space. And so the first portfolio we constructed and launched at SOCAP 16 from the main stage and with a dedicated panel was called the Divest Invest Clean 15, which just highlighted that across a wide range of asset classes, public equities, fixed income, private debt and private equity, real assets, across timberland, farmland, real estate, that there were emerging opportunities to invest in instruments and strategies that were free of fossil fuels, but also invested in climate solutions. Since that time, the project has kind of been taken back from SOCAP with transformations going on within the SOCAP community. And now the Institute really manages and coordinates the project with a growing group of collaborative sponsors. And I'm really delighted to have several of those folks here. Christy, I don't know if that slide might be the next one by chance, the sponsor slide. But this gives you a sense of dozens of different groups that have joined with us in this effort to help fund the research and convenings that we've done. And we've done them in San Francisco with the Sierra Club Foundation, Farmland LP. We've done them at SOCAP 365 events in New York, at the Impact Hub in New York, and now this is the first time we've done an in-person convening in the Boston area, so we're really excited to do that here. And we're very interested in continuing to nourish these kinds of conversations around the country in other places, and always interested in looking for partners to do that. And obviously here, my fellow Roundtable contributors are all from the Boston area, so it's great to be able to highlight the very strong density and sort of concentration of folks who are working on both fossil-free investing strategies and solutions to climate change. I think one other facet that's novel this year for the Clean Portfolio Project is that in addition to putting out resources and doing in-person events at conferences and in small investor-focused convenings, we also now launched a webinar series this year in which we're beginning to work thematically through different solutions to climate change. The first was in January, focused on regenerative food and ag. And this, in a way, by bringing together both the in-person investor focused event as well as the webinar, is continuing that. So this is the second thematic webinar focused on renewable energy. Christine, I don't know if there's a slide related to the themes of the initial project.
Josh, did you want to mention?
Yeah. Mention the forum? Yeah, I guess that's another place in which we've done an in-person convening is the Croatan Forum. This is a new initiative. We had our first one in Durham, North Carolina, the Research Triangle area, where our core team is based in the fall of last year, and indeed folks from the Sunwealth team, as well as some of our other active participants participated in a session at the Croatan Forum dedicated to the Clean Portfolio Project as a theme, with a focus on investing in a just transition in particular. That is to say, integrating social equity considerations into the clean energy transition, and it's a theme that's going to recur in our conversation today as well. And we're really excited to continue to use the forum as one of multiple platforms in which we're engaging with people interested in solutions to climate change and those involved in the Clean Portfolio Project. Our next one, as the slide suggests, is going to be in the spring of 2020. So please plan to join us if you'd like. I guess, Christy, it's worth saying to the next slide that we're obviously talking about investment and finance, and because of that, it's a regulated industry. And so we should make really clear that what we're doing today is by no means a set of recommendations for investment. This is by no means a solicitation. This is not a marketing event for any particular products or funds. What we're doing as a nonprofit at the Institute and in the Clean Portfolio Project is helping people in the field who are interested in reallocating capital understand the opportunity set as they're emerging across asset classes. That's really the point of this. And a similar note is that when we construct portfolios, the sponsors have nothing to do with that. And we have an independent process. So this is by no means a kind of pay-to-play initiative. Nobody here is a broker-dealer, and nobody's here making pitches. To be quite transparent and explicit about that. This is really to help people understand the panoply of options that are beginning to emerge, and we welcome the participation of other kinds of funds, managers, broker-dealers, advisors, asset owners, and other kindred nonprofits who have already been very actively involved in this work. So I mentioned at SOCAP 16, we launched the Divest Invest Clean 15, which provided for 5 sets of asset classes, a series of best-in-class opportunity sets that had institutional character, were being competitively benchmarked within their asset class, that also had social impact features, social impact reporting features, in addition to providing fossil-free climate solutions. And so we continue to work off of this basic premise of thinking about multiple asset classes as a framework, total portfolio approaches to investing in climate solutions. And as we move forward, our hope is, in fact, to extend beyond this initial set of 5 asset classes into areas that are growing. Hedge funds, private debt, exploding the real assets case, and dealing with infrastructure, and also cash, which is missing here, in addition to some of the other esoteric alternative asset classes. And the next slide highlights, at least for the initial Clean Portfolio that was developed, 10 climate solutions themes on which the project has focused heretofore. And so just to run through those, it ranges from clean technology and resilient community development to just pure environmental finance, green building in the built environment, renewable energy, which is obviously our focus thematically today, as well as energy efficiency and other ways to think about supporting the renewable energy marketplace. And then sustainable food and ag, forestry and timberland, sustainable transport and smart growth, sustainable corporate work broadly, and then clean and sustainable water systems. Those are the first 10 solutions areas that we're really focusing on the project. And again, as this project evolves, we certainly welcome additional opportunities to explore new themes as they're arising in the climate solutions space. So with that, I think I'm going to open this up a bit more fully to actual roundtable discussion with our speakers. I think the next slide, Christy, provides an overview of the folks who are here.
Yes, one moment, I'm having technical difficulties.
Okay. So there are half a dozen folks who are joining me today in the core part of the conversation that we're facilitating. And I just want to thank everybody, all of you, for joining us here. We're going to begin with Lindsay White from Ceres. And Lindsay is the Senior Manager of the Ceres Investor Network on Climate Risk and Sustainability. And I'm not going to go through and belabor everybody's bio, but I know that Lindsay is very active in the Boston chapter of WISE, a community of practice focused on women investing that we're really excited also to be allied with in a variety of our different initiatives when it comes to diversity. And to my immediate left here is Elizabeth Levy from Trillium Asset Management, where she's a Senior Vice President, Portfolio Manager, and Research Analyst focusing on renewables. And she also leads both the all-cap core and fossil-free core strategies at Trillium in public equities. Peter Kaufman, to my far left, is the President and a lead portfolio manager at Breckinridge Capital Advisors, a major bond fund manager, which also has concerted fossil-free strategies based here in Boston. Jonathan Abe, on my far left, is the CEO of Sunwealth. So again, John, thanks so much for hosting us today. Really appreciate that. To Jonathan's left, actually, I believe, no, right to my immediate left is Johanna Wolfson, who's the co-founder and principal at Prime Impact Fund, which is a new early-stage investment fund deploying philanthropic capital into the renewable space. And then last but not least, we're going to hear from Ash Dixit from Athena Capital Advisors, which is based out in Lincoln and Lexington here in the Boston area, and has its origins as a multifamily office, now as a leading investment advisor in the impact space. And what's nice about this group, in addition to them all being from the Boston area, is that they also provide really distinctive perspectives on this opportunity set around renewables. So what we try to do today, as we often try to do in the project, is to have voices representing different kinds of asset owners, different kinds of asset classes, and other forms of intermediation. So today, in particular, what we have is the perspective that Lindsay's going to be bringing to us at first from a broad constellation of asset owners as well as asset managers. But I think we're particularly interested in hearing about the interest and curiosity on the part of asset owners for getting exposure to this space. And the work that they're doing at Ceres with a variety of other asset owning constellations and networks. And then we're going to walk through a series of asset classes again. So each fund manager's firm really has core expertise in a different asset class, as you've heard: public equities, fixed income, private debt, and tax equity financing on the Sunwealth side. Johanna's team on the private equity side, but with a blended capital approach, that has a wide spectrum of return profiles that we're going to be seeing here. And then Ash coming from the total portfolio approach, really the multi-asset class perspective of someone actually doing due diligence on funds and allocating capital across all of these asset classes. So we have a really interesting kind of diverse array of points of view in this space. And so with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay.
Thank
you, Josh, and thank you, Christy, for hosting this event. And I wanted to add my words of thanks as well to our hosts at Greentown Labs and Sunwealth. I was actually in this location a year ago when Greentown Labs very kindly opened up what was then this new facility to the Series conference for a conference program segment, which John's colleague Ryan, who I think is just off camera, spoke at. So great to be back here and just really exciting to see the growth of Greentown and clearly a key part of the clean trillion equation, which I will speak more about. So to dive in here, I'll be giving some framing remarks about both Series and then also about kind of the North Star that we're all focused on as we sit around the table today. So for those unfamiliar with Series in the room or over the web, so Series is a sustainability nonprofit organization headquartered here in Boston, and actually this is the 30th year this year of Series founding. So what we do is we work with the world's most influential companies and investors to drive solutions and build leadership to create a truly sustainable global economy and a sustainable future for people and the planet. Now, as part of our work related to today's topic on renewable energy, so Series in 2014 released a seminal report titled The Clean Trillion. And the Clean Trillion is basically derived from the International Energy Agency's, now IRENA, their prediction in 2012 and their estimation that we really needed to invest about an annual aggregate of about $1 trillion in global clean energy investment in order to stay below that 2 degrees Celsius temperature raise over pre-industrial levels. So that was in 2012, the year of that prediction. Global clean energy investment, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, was tracking at about $276 trillion. And in the intervening years, it's still tracked at about a third of where we need to go towards that initial IEA or ARENA's projection to stay below 2 degrees Celsius. So that's one trend just to keep in mind. We do have a graph over there on the right that shows that total trend over time. And those numbers, again, sourced by Bloomberg New Energy Finance. At the same time, there have been some other interesting trends in terms of our ability to reach that really critical goal. One has been because of falling costs of some technologies. There's actually been a change in that target. So just recently, I think about a week ago, there were new numbers released that basically there has been shaved off about 10 trillion of that target. We now need to reach 115 trillion in aggregate by 2050 rather than 125, and that's due to the falling technology costs. So that's positive. At the same time, the goalpost has also, as we know, shifted. So instead of aiming for 2 degrees, what we're looking at is really aiming for that 1.5 degrees Celsius North Star. And the reason for that, of course, is that climate science, which we've known for a long time, but coming into ever sharper focus as per the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's most recent report, detailing really what the impacts are and very much here now, as well as in the long term. So that just to set the stage for our conversation here today is what we're really looking at. So the way that Series approaches that goal is really from a couple of different perspectives. So the one we're here to talk about today is really the investor perspective. So looking at the investor network, I'm going to say a few words about that, and just want to highlight, we have a couple of members of the Series Investor Network here at the table today. So Trillium and Breckinridge, both longtime members, and then Brian, well, not a member we work with closely, so great to be among familiar faces. But the Investor Network has been around through since 2003, so about 16 years now, a little over half of Series existence. And really the genesis of it was founded in 2003 at Investor Summit at the United Nations headquarters in New York. At that time, it was founded with 6 founding pension funds. Fast forward to today, it includes 168 with asset owners and asset managers and about 26.2 trillion in aggregate AUM. And really the focus of the Investor Network is on topics such as renewable energy, climate solutions investment, also looking at policy advocacy, and then newer issues such as sustainable forestry, and for a long time as well as shareholder engagement. So really the commonality across this diverse set of asset owner and asset managers in both the US and Canada, we are North American focused, really looking at sustainable investing and broad topics across that spectrum that are focused through a sustainability lens. So just wanted to make one side note, series also does run a parallel corporate network and also different elements of climate and energy work across different sectors. And so all critical parts of the clean trillion equation. For today's purposes, we are going to be talking about the investor approaches and that network. So looking at that network, one of the working groups that we maintain, to Josh's point on partnerships, is a great partnership with the Intentional Endowments Network, and then also the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility, and this is the Climate Solutions Investment Initiative. So this initiative is a newer initiative. It was stood up in May 2017, so just about 2 years back. And the focus and purpose of it is really to help to catalyze increased investment in climate solutions, both by academic endowments and then also by faith-based asset owners, and all working towards that North Star and global imperative of reaching the clean trillion. So as for our slide here, CSII members are really taking leadership to consider climate-related investments, to think about inserting climate into their investment policy statements and 2020 goal settings, to collaborate with peers, and to report then on those climate-related investments. So that's one piece of the work that we're doing there. Our members across the board are showing great leadership, from U.S. pension funds to foundations, family offices, academic endowments, and then many different actors within our investor network. So I will pause there and then open the floor to our more asset class by asset class discussion on the roundtable. But that's a basic summary of kind of the goal that we are all working towards on a global basis here in Boston and across the world. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Lindsay. Really appreciate it. I'm going to turn over to Ms. Levy from Trillium.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And again, I'm also really glad to be here in Greentown Labs. I've never been here before. So I'm very excited to get to be here and thank both Roseanne and Sunwell also. So for anyone who's not familiar with Trillium, we are one of the oldest investment managers exclusively focused on sustainable and responsible and impact investing. Our clients are split pretty evenly between individuals and endowments and other institutional clients. And Trillium invests across a range of asset classes, debt, community investments, increasingly in the private markets, and all of these asset classes interact with renewables. But as Josh mentioned, I spend my time in the public equity markets, so that's the perspective that I'm representing today. So a few weeks ago, I found a study that McKinsey had done for the Norwegian government that was published at the end of last year that was talking about the amount of investment that was going to be needed between now and roughly 2050 to stay within our climate boundaries. And so that study had found that there was going to be about 25% of this investment was going to be in the public equity market. So when somebody says to you investing in renewables or investing in preventing climate change, renewable energy technology is often the first thing that comes to people's minds. But what I really want to focus on is that pure plays are just the tip of the iceberg. So of that quarter of the total investment that's going to be in the public market, only 3% is going to be in the pure play renewables. So we really need to take a broader view. I think everybody can understand what a solar panel manufacturer, for example, or a wind turbine component manufacturer is doing to combat climate change. But there's lots of other public equity ways that we need to be thinking about it. So for example, and I'm pretty much, I realize, going to be marching through the slide that Josh presented at the beginning, linking to the other climate solutions themes. But energy efficiency, I think a lot of us know of that as well. So this is old school industrial companies that are helping to, for example, improve the buildings that already exist or the buildings that are going to be built over the coming decades to use less energy. Enabling technologies such as smart meters or companies that are building out the electric grid, that's going to be so necessary to connect to all of these far-flung wind turbines in particular that are going to be built all over the globe in all over the country. A few areas that I've been getting interested in recently, the organizations and the companies that are purchasing renewable energy. So over the last 18 months in particular, we've been seeing the rise of corporate power purchase agreements, PPAs, which is basically companies saying, I want to run off of clean energy, but my local utility doesn't necessarily offer it, and my roof isn't big enough to put on enough solar for myself. Can anybody help me out with that? So that has become an increasingly large portion of the clean energy being installed in this country in particular. And the companies that are putting it up sparked interesting, two different checks. One is consumer-facing companies. I think it's somewhat obvious why they might want to. They know that their consumers are looking for green and sustainable brands. And so one of the things they want to talk about is that they are powered by 100% renewable energy, for example. But also the technology companies who run massive data centers, which have massive energy appetites. So they are looking to lock in their energy costs, as well as show their employees and their own customers that they also care about climate change. And increasingly, one interesting group of companies that I'm looking at is the electric utilities. They see the writing on the wall. The grid of today is not the grid of tomorrow. So many of them are starting to turn towards renewables. Some of them are turning really slowly and maybe not ever actually going to do it, but there are some leaders out there, and so we can be looking at those companies as well. But as I mentioned, according to this McKinsey study, it's only going to be about a quarter of the investment needed that's going to be in the public market. So I'm actually really interested to hear from the other asset classes today. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz. Really appreciate it. Staying within the public markets, I've turned over to Peter Kaufman from Breckinridge to talk about what's happening in fixed income.
Thank you. Yes, staying in the public markets, but switching over to investment-grade fixed income, which is our singular focus at Breckinridge. And we've been around 26 years, but we did not, in earnest, really commit to ESG and sustainable investing and impact investing until like 2011. But we've committed in earnest. We're B Corp and Benefit Corp, and our analysts, we've got 16 of them, and this is what really drives them day to day. So one of the points I make on the fixed income side is sort of going a little beyond something that Jeremy Grantham is fond of saying. And he refers to sort of the scourge of the discount rate, the fact that there's sort of a market failure in pricing a lot of costs and risks that are long-term, that most corporations don't really care about what's out there 25 years from now. So what I take from that is that we tend to use a lower discount rate in fixed income and investment-grade fixed income, and we tend to have a longer duration view. And our highest responsibility as investors or investment managers is sort of the sanctity, the preservation of capital. So we are looking out long, and I would argue that you look, when is this market failure going to remedy itself? Well, when investors start to more broadly, adequately and accurately price these risks and costs, and it's when the market begins to as a consequence of that, to respond. And I would suggest that it's probably a fairly high probability that the fixed income market may be where we first see serious issues, where investors begin to, in a meaningful way, direct their investments away from sectors or companies that are more susceptible to these future liabilities and costs. So what does Breckinridge do? We have for years done fossil fuel-free portfolios. We have about $730 million that we manage. And that's pretty straightforward. We use MSCI's screening tool, but we also have a lot of clients who want to go beyond that and do some customization. So that's the best part. And our job there is try to the best of our abilities, assure that does not represent, that screen does not represent a give up in market return, right? That we can achieve returns that are consistent with our unconstrained portfolios. And I'm happy to say, and I'm not advertising because our unconstrained portfolios might have terrible returns, but the remain fossil fuel free, have returns that are consistent with this. So, so that's kind of the divest part, and then on the invest part, we do much as Trillium and Liz described, that we're looking for leaders across industries and sectors. And I think it comes, obviously greenhouse gas and renewables, we're paying close attention in the utility space, and we buy a lot of utility bonds. So we want to reward and direct capital, and we do believe fundamentally that companies that are preparing for these challenges are less risky, right? And it's also not a bad thing to see a management that's a little less preoccupied with quarter-to-quarter results and beginning to sort of accept and address these future challenges. The other thing we do, which I know Trillium and plenty of others in this room do in different ways, is we engage with companies, and that's the part that I actually get most excited about at Breckinridge, because we're creditors, we're debt holders, so we have no vote, right? So we get management on the line, and we have the opportunity to say, this isn't really advocacy. This is only us as an investor, as a creditor, trying to get a better handle on your policies and practices with, renewables and greenhouse gases and a lot of other issues, because purely as an investor, we think these factors are relevant and material, and that there's some risks out there that the market isn't adequately pricing. So I like to say we punch way above our weight in that regard, just because companies aren't accustomed to that, to see it from a purely investment standpoint. And so anyway, we're doing more of it all the time.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I know, Liz, you didn't talk much about advocacy, actually listed equities, although I think in the roundtable conversation we'll have an opportunity to revisit that question about the nature of not just shareholder engagement, but as we're getting to hear, what we like to describe as the Institute as really investor engagement, that can really acknowledge the specificity of where you come within the capital markets, whether it's from an asset class perspective or from somewhere else within the financial value chain, because every investor has substantial voice when it comes to corporates as well as other issuers and other sponsors of instruments in which one may be able to invest, and that's going to look very differently in different asset classes. So I'm excited to foster that conversation both here and more widely as we do. From the public markets, I think we're now going to turn more into alternative asset classes and private markets, and John from Sunwealth is going to lead us into that endeavor.
Sure. Thank you very much again for inviting us. And we're a little younger than some of the other prestigious organizations here, so we count our track records still in quarters. We've been around for 19 quarters. Go to the next slide. We can boast 17 quarters of target returns to our investors. And I think what you'll find is you learn more about the team, our investors, and our projects, that we are built to be a generational business to address generational problems. And so today we have done 78 solar projects that we fund and manage, and we fund these projects to the benefit of diverse and underserved communities. And we have 120 investors in our community and growing. And we currently have 16 projects under construction, including a 500 kilowatt project on top of the publicly traded REIT, Equinix, which is one of the largest data center owners in the world. And so what I wanted to do was kind of summarize what does a clean energy just transition, to use Groten's term, look like? And if you could please advance to the next slide.
Yeah.
So this is what it looks like from our perspective. On the left, you have Olive Knight, who is a low to moderate income homeowner, and she was unable to get financing for a solar project or qualify for one of the typical solar PPAs. So what we did through our Solar Access program is we lease her rooftop. We give her the opportunity to not only get clear and tangible and basically guaranteed savings through the life of our contract, give her options to own the system starting at year 10. And then what we don't provide to her in the form of energy savings, we sell to the Walden Woods Project, which owns all the land around the state park at Walden Pond. And then on the right, this is Dan McGrath. So Dan McGrath was raised in Winter Hill and Somerville. Single mother. He's the oldest in his family. He had to start working at a very young age to support him. He graduated from Somerville High, and he got his electrical contractor's license. We've been working with Dan McGrath in his IBW shop out of Malden since, for almost 19 quarters now. And we've grown with that organization. They do 10 to 15% of our installation work, and they've grown from a team of 5 to over 20. And Dan McGrath, he remembers when this Greentown Labs was a Mako facility, and Dan McGrath and his team built the project on top of Greentown Labs. And I encourage everyone to go on the tour afterwards with my partner, Ryan Diggs. So this is another example of what we call solar access. This is a project in Oakfield, New York, basically a rural portion of New York. It's a very red county. But here we own and operate the system on top of the Oakfield Fire Department. This is a volunteer fire department. This fire department also doubles as the recreation center for that community. And so this is where the Mother's Day breakfast is going to be soon, where they have the tractor pull, where the community gathers and uses the space. The other thing that's cool about this, in addition to providing savings for a very important organization and local jobs, is that here the fire department is taking a leadership role in a region where there isn't a lot of solar and showing the community that we can do solar. It's safe, it saves money, and you can too. And this project is on the banks of the Connecticut River in the city of Holyoke. So here, we straightened it out a little bit, but this is basically a 2-acre sloping piece of land that has has limited use other than for a solar project. And here you have a 430 kilowatt solar project where we sell the power generated from this project to the Holyoke Housing Authority. And the Holyoke Housing Authority doesn't have the best credit, but this is, again, where we're inspired by the community that supports solar. Holyoke Gas and Electric, which has the best credit rating in that community, stepped in and they're backstopping this deal. And finally, this is Father Edwin. This is at the blessing of our solar project that we did with our partner and Greentown Lab, Resident Energy. And this is a project on top of the Epiphany School in inner city Boston. And the Epiphany School is a private school that's focused on providing a middle school and high school education to at-risk kids that graduate elementary school from low-income communities. And they provide them with all-day education and activities, 3 meals, basically health insurance and mental health counseling and guidance counseling as well. And so this is an example where we worked with local partners to provide local jobs. They're providing energy savings to an important organization in the community. Unbeknownst to us, they also integrated into their curriculum. And so part of their STEM program involves the kids studying and learning from that solar project as well. So thank you. I again encourage everyone to go on the tour afterwards. I'm glad to be part of this panel.
Great, thanks, John. Really appreciate it. I'll turn over to Johanna from Prime.
Great. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm already learning so much from the panelists around me. So I'm here to talk about Prime, and what we're doing at Prime and Prime Impact Fund is very early stage venture capital with a twist. And the twist is philanthropic. So we're actually marshaling philanthropic capital, primarily capital from the grant-making side of foundations and from donor-advised funds, so capital that's charitable in nature, taking a tax exemption, and using it in the style of venture capital. And so I'll explain why we do this, but what I think is interesting for this group is to think about philanthropic capital enabling renewable and climate relevant investments in other asset classes. So I'm going to be essentially describing what is a case study for philanthropic capital in venture. And what I'd love you all to think about, and maybe we chat afterwards, is what else can philanthropic capital enable in other asset classes? That's a kind of an open future area of exploration for Prime. So in venture, where our view of the world is supporting very early stage, tech-heavy startup companies, much of the type of companies that are here at Greentown Labs, so that's kind of a similar zone as the companies that we support. We think about, okay, well, to meet the IPCC goals, we know we can get a lot of the way there by deploying existing solutions, but without policy change, we also need to develop new solutions or reduce the cost of existing solutions, and technology innovation is one way that we know works to do that. Traditional venture capital is very good at supporting companies that are capital light in nature, that can yield venture-like returns in 7 years or so for a 10-year closed-ended fund. Venture is not traditionally great at supporting companies that are going to require a lot of capital to scale, equipment to manufacture, integration into existing infrastructure, whether those be power plants or urban infrastructure or transportation infrastructure and so on. And so what we worry about at Prime is how are we going to support hardware companies whose technologies we also need to achieve decarbonization if their businesses are not a fundamental match for venture capital, which is the riskiest asset class that there is. So there's this mismatch. And my colleague, Sarah Carney, who I think many of you know, founded Prime based on the insight that we could use philanthropic capital for this purpose, and to support companies whose primary, or rather, who are serving a social benefit, in this case, mitigating climate change, where we see a pathway towards significant greenhouse gas emissions reduction, that venture capital would not support right now because it's too early or too risky, but for whom we can see a pathway for venture to support after we get involved. So that's what we do. We support companies that are not a slam dunk fit for traditional venture right now, could yield really significant gigaton scale emissions reduction, and can be de-risked with philanthropic dollars. And so Prime has done this on kind of a syndication base with foundations and family offices for a few years now. We've supported about 10 companies in that way, and we now are investing out of the Prime Impact Fund, which is same concept, same types of dollars coming in from foundations and families and individuals, and it's supporting the same types of companies, but demonstrating that we can do this, in a standalone fund, which we are now thinking about what will be future iterations of that, and how can it start to crowd in commercial capital sources. And that's what we think about, because we know that, as Lindsay took us through, we need big numbers to move here. So we're always looking for where philanthropic capital can unlock very significant amounts of commercial capital. A couple of other things I'll mention. What we do right now with Prime is use philanthropic capital just to be concessionary on risk. So this is something we say a lot. We're not actually concessionary on returns. We're concessionary on risk. So we're just embracing more technical risk. There's still an opportunity for capital to come back very meaningfully. Of course, if someone participates in our fund with charitable capital and that capital is returned, it stays charitable capital, right? But then as a philanthropist, it can be regifted, and that's a wonderful thing. There might be in other asset classes, other forms that philanthropic capital could take. We've, been started thinking about project finance and debt, and whether there's a concessionary component that it would be appropriate for philanthropic capital to take. So again, I look forward to others' ideas. But where we are today, focusing on early stage venture, I think we're just we're full speed ahead on continuing to demonstrate that companies can be supported in an equity-like fashion with this type of capital, which we've seen a lot of momentum toward. Some of the things we're excited about, we have some kind of higher profile folks involved in our fund, including Hewlett Foundation, Grantham Foundation, Sierra Club Foundation. We also have a ton of others that I think are, not household names, which we're actually super excited about, that we're demonstrating this groundswell of small family foundations that really want to make a difference in this way, as well as donor-advised funds. And we've now worked with many dozens of donor-advised fund sponsors to help their clients participate in the work that we're doing. So we're just tremendously excited about that, and are actively investing out of our fund now. Our fund is 2 quarters old, so it's very early, but we're excited to be making our 4th investment this month, and a group of great companies that we think can really move the needle on climate change.
Great. Thanks very much, Joanna. I really appreciate it. So as we're beginning to hear, there's a very wide opportunity set across asset classes to investment solutions to climate change. I mean, that's the sort of prima facie observation here. But at the same time, there's a wide spectrum of risk-return opportunities, depending on asset classes and the sectors in which people are deploying capital, and also where the source of capital is found, right, in terms of the asset owners, whether they be foundations or commercial capital individuals. So we're beginning to hear about that. And so I think it's really helpful to turn to Ash now from Athena, since they work precisely with clients, who are eager to deploy capital across this kind of opportunity set, to hear how Athena approaches it and what kind of opportunities you're seeing across asset classes, Ash.
Great. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm a big fan of Greentown. I really like the beer here. And they do a lot of cool events. I guess I'm going to start a little bit about what Athena is, talk about how we're approaching environmental investing, or investing with an environmental lens, and maybe talk about challenges that we see. I know Josh gave me a big responsibility of figuring out how to make a clean portfolio, but it's really difficult because you're optimizing on risk, return, and impact. And what does that mean? So I think I'm going to throw more questions than answers. So Athena is a wealth management firm, multifamily office with a lot of high net worth individuals and institutions. We build customized portfolios for each of them that are diversified across asset classes. Some of the asset classes are ones that are represented on this roundtable. So if you think about our job, is if you have $100, how much of that $100 would you give to the different companies or firms represented on this panel? But the problem is there are a lot of Breckinridges, Trilliums, Sunwell. Right. And Prime. So our job is to talk to all these different players and allocate capital, or make recommendations on how to allocate that capital. Our clients have been making investments, responsible investments, environmentally and socially conscious investments for a while, and they're slowly moving into the environmental space and being much more determined about how to create an impact there. So we looked at a lot of opportunities for climate change mitigation. There's a landscape, particularly in private markets recently. And in the top 4 industries, everyone knows it's energy, transport, buildings, and industry. That really requires a lot of change. And we see a lot of opportunities for disruption there, coming from technological change, hardware as well as software, regulation, as well as the increasingly recognizable physical and transition risk from climate change. We do say we're looking at private markets because there's a lot of opportunities, there are a lot of funds that are opening up, but I think as Elizabeth was mentioning, a lot of big corporates are starting to move this space. So although maybe their solutions-based revenue coming from them might be like 10% or 20%, that is still meaningful. So it's helpful to move beyond just pure plays and look at kind of these diversified companies as well. And to Peter's point, I do agree with you. I think the fixed income guys are going to get this way more than anyone else. maybe to close out with some challenges, is as I was saying, if you're optimizing across risk, return, and impact, risk and return, maybe you can compare across asset classes. Impact is very difficult. Maybe you can say there's a carbon yield or carbon abatement yield, but how Trillium measures it versus how Johanna measures it, which is yours is much more forward-looking, whereas yours is existing. How do you compare that, and how do you put it together in a portfolio? That's difficult. And I do think there's a need to move beyond just a number. This is a conversation we hear a lot in gender lens investing, but I think it also needs to come in environmental lens investing, moving beyond just carbon emissions, because there's deep fundamental changes required in the economy. So how do you think about that? What are the measures to think about that? We're thinking about transportation and electrifying transportation, but it's still changing the same old single-use vehicle models and changing that. And turning it off to find those. And I guess finally, I know that I said there's a lot of Breckinridges, Trilliums, and Prime and Sunwealth as well, but I think there still needs to be a stronger pipeline. More people still need to come into this space and bring much more rigor from both the financial side as well as the scientific and legal side to get better at these strategies.
Great. Thank you, Ash. Really appreciate it. And thanks to all of our roundtable contributors for these thoughtful introductory reflections. I'm going to start with Ash, actually, since his remarks are the most capacious when it comes to the full portfolio. And indeed, he's left us with a series of challenges and questions that I think are precisely the kinds of things that we hope to foster first among just our roundtable participants, and then to open up to the rest of us here in the room, as well as those of you who are online. So I'd like to begin with the proposition around the total portfolio and several inferences I'm drawing from your remarks, right? So total portfolio activation is our mantra at the Institute and for other practitioners in the field, increasingly so, where there's an opportunity set, at least to think about it in that frame. And so one point you made rightly, Ash, is that impact looks different in different asset classes. And indeed, I think we often intuitively understand that. But if I may say so, just take the liberty to probe that a bit more fully in a critical spirit, I think we may want to recognize some of the challenges that lead one to, I think, the conclusions that Prime is making for certain kinds of asset classes, that there may need to be philanthropic interventions to support certain parts of markets that clearly are not registering all this, as Peter suggested too. And why is that? It's because it seems to me that the framework that many of us are operating under, including most, advisors, is modern portfolio theory, right? And so the basic premise there is that portfolios are diversified radically across asset classes and across the investable universe. If you take it even further, the sort of premises of modern portfolio theory as they've been applied in the institutional investor space in particular, it would be the endowment model of investing, right? David Swenson, pioneer at Yale University. And what that means is that there's an equity risk premium that a long-term investor has the opportunity to seize. And that's an intriguing proposition for a lot of institutional investors who often do have a long-term investment horizon. And one would think, given the long-term challenges of climate change, that there would be a lovely harmony between a long-term sustainable investing perspective and quite literally a perpetual investment horizon on the part of a college endowment, right? Indeed, college endowments like at Yale or others in the neighborhood here across an invisible border. Endowments that are older than the history of the United States of America, right? And yet, it doesn't seem to be the case for some reason. The lesson drawn within the endowment model of investing about risk is not so much about the social risk or the risk of climate change. It's simply the fact that because we're a long-term investor, we can stomach volatility in the short term. Now, of course, the problem, as many of us experienced a decade ago, is that sometimes when you're only operating on the conception of risk measured in terms of volatility of price, we actually are disregarding a lot of the social and environmental risks that all of us, I think, in this room are trying to grapple with. And in doing so, we actually misunderstand the nature of an asset class. And suddenly everything is correlated when they're supposed to be uncorrelated, because we haven't really defined the asset class to the specificity of its social or environmental function. Meaning, you invest in real estate because you want to house people, or you want to create buildings in which we have entrepreneurial innovation. Or you invest in farmland, not because of a double-digit annualized return, because you want to feed people or clothe people. Or you invest in timberland so you can have working landscapes. You invest in publicly traded companies, right? Because you want to support companies that are creating products and services we need. And it's not just the historical risk return profile. So if people are kind of following me here a bit, there's a kind of paradox that we have between principals and agents, between asset owners and asset managers, particularly those who are being more thoughtful about it. So I want to begin by opening up the conversation with the roundtable participants along those lines, and that is to say, to Ash's point, he's a little concerned about the asymmetry of impact. And so I wondered if each of our roundtable participants could talk a little bit about the impact that they see they're deriving from the exposures that they're providing to their clients. And maybe in Lindsay's case, since she's not a fund manager in the way that the other panelists are, if you wouldn't mind giving voice to some of the diversity of asset owners who I think are grappling with this long-term perspective, right? And drawing different conclusions, some of which, you know, is supportive of advancing this problem, other cases only weakly so, and maybe needs philanthropic capital or credit enhancements or something to get this stuff done, backstopping, as you described, from neighbors. So I'm kind of curious about that. If we could just kind of walk through each of the asset classes and get your take on impact opportunity in particular. And if I can put Liz on the spot first, just since that's kind of how we had the conversation from public markets to private markets. I think that might be interesting because I'm drawing an inference that you can't have so much impact in the public markets I hear, but then we also talked about engagement, and that's where quantifiable impact actually can be tracked if only we have systems for doing so. So we'll start with you, Liz, and then we'll kind of go right back through the panel around this question of the impact that you see in your asset class around renewable energy opportunities.
Sure. So when we talk about impact and when we report on impact for our products, which we do, there are a few different ways. The one I think Peter had mentioned that you can report on, you know, this fund or this strategy had a carbon footprint that was X% lower than its benchmark, which in itself is laudable. But you're right, a lot of the work that we do is around engagement. One of the things Trillium is known for is our engagement team. We have 4 professionals whose job is to pester companies and to bug them and to say, you're not thinking about the future. You are really worried about next quarter or maybe next year if we're going to be generous here, but you're not looking at these societal changes that are coming down the road in a decade or 2 decades. So how are you going to get ready for them? So that's what a lot of our advocacy work is around. How are you maximizing your workforce? How are you retaining your workforce? How are you thinking about your energy needs in the future? So we've done a lot of work, as I mentioned earlier, around urging corporations to sign these power purchase agreements. Guess what? We're not really doing so much of that work anymore because it's been proven out economically. So we had a lot of success with that a few years ago, and that idea has really caught on. Some of the companies that we had been urging to do it were some of the leaders in doing so. And so now they've got that energy stream lined up for the future. And many of their peers are saying, oh, that's an economic proposition. I'm going to do that too. So, you know, I think you could stay within the public equity markets, like, oh, are you really having impact? But we think there is a lot to be said there using that investor voice, the investor vote that we have to vote our proxies on the resolutions, which we and many of our colleagues in Boston and around the world have filed and put on the proxy statements of these companies. But also, really, it's the act of letting people know also, I think, what's in their portfolios. And so reporting that carbon footprint, which, you know, might not seem to be a big thing, but it is. I mean, how many mutual funds out there give you that carbon footprint without being prodded to do so by some of the data providers. And there's more and more data providers that are giving that information, new ones today, I believe. And so with that information out there, you can start looking around, and investors have the opportunity to judge their managers and to think about, what's my portfolio? What is this particular portfolio, in this case, an equity portfolio? How are they prepared for the future? Because when you think about, pick on Yale for a moment, where I have a master's degree from, and they choose not to divest, and they're actually like arresting their students who are begging them to divest. And I've worked with a lot of students from different schools that are trying to urge their universities to divest their portfolios, because Josh is right. These schools hopefully are going to be there for hundreds more years. Can their endowments stand to have fossil fuels in their endowments for hundreds of years? No, that's a ridiculous proposition. I think many of us around this table would agree. So it is time to start using the equity portfolio in particular as a way to bring in some of these other opportunities and start thinking about them.
Peter, fixed income impact, public markets, what are you financing that can be attributed back to the investor, some piece of this action?
There's a few things I want to say, so I'm going to get to that. I just want to jump on the, because whenever anybody talks about modern portfolio theory, it gets my blood up. I get so frustrated because I think it's wrought so many ills. But broader than that, I mean, it's all sort of this market fundamentalism, that markets are rational and all-knowing and efficient. Good Lord, I mean, from what we've seen over the last 20 years, who can say that with a straight face? And so, and of course, as I said earlier, you know, there is this, there is a market failure at some level that, you know, in this, all this short-termism that investors and markets are ignoring longer-term challenges and risks. So, I do, you know, again, back to the fixed income. It sounds very self-serving, but it applies to any fixed income investor and manager. Where's the one asset class that you're a little less beholden to markets, right? Where's, it's fixed income, where I actually feel as a fiduciary investor an obligation to look beyond markets, because my highest responsibility, again, is safety of principal and interest. And if ultimately I think that's in jeopardy because a company or a municipality is ignoring serious risks, then I think it's incumbent on me to respond to that. So a little bit about the impact. I think the exciting thing that we've found in our investing, most of the portfolios we invest are not corporate bond portfolios, but actually municipal bond portfolios. And the tough thing about a municipality is you're stuck, like with your geography. You can't move your supply chain off to somewhere else and export your pollution or whatever. So municipalities, and a lot of them have to worry about coastal vulnerability and sea level rise. A lot of them have to worry about, extreme heat or extreme weather. And there's a lot of good data that we're getting from companies, vendors that are really, for the insurance industries and others, are starting to report and collect this, and so we can really use it. And we are. I mean, if you talk to a small little coastal community and they've not made, if they have no coastal resiliency or assessment or anything that they can talk about. I mean, that is alarming to us. And so across this spectrum in the public markets, I do think the municipal bond market is likely going to be one that quickly sort of punishes and rewards communities that have begun to address these issues. So, so that, you know, it'll be measured in market returns and performance, but there are good systems out that are helping us to sort of quantify this risk.
That's helpful. So before going into the private market side, I wonder if I could turn to Lindsay just as a kind of hinge here as we shift from public back to private, to get a sense of, you know, series members, the investor network kind of points of view, because obviously extremely diverse in terms of scale as well as geography and fiduciary responsibility, right? Foundations don't operate under the same fiduciary responsibility as a college endowment or a pension fund or the other kinds of members that you have. So could you sort of opine on this impact question among series members?
Sure. So a couple of points I want to focus on just to round out in particular the public markets actually through line that we have here from fellow network members. But before getting to that, did want to acknowledge too to the endowment management question, our partner for CSAI, IEN, and we have Hannah Bowen here in the room today. So IEN has recently released a new endowment roadmap, so looking at kind of driving towards sustainable investing and ESG integration. Just wanted to flag that as a great resource. A little bit of a tangent here to our conversation today, more focused on the renewable energy side, but just as we look at endowment management, great resource for the sector and for, of course, academic endowments in particular. So in terms of looking at public markets, one of the areas where Series has long concentrated and many of our members have really is on the shareholder engagement and stakeholder engagement side. So just want to touch on that briefly, building on the comments from Liz and Peter. And worth noting that one of the really many topics that we focus on through our shareholder initiative on climate and sustainability, or STIX, which has really been run for about 2 decades now, co-chaired by Series and our partners. So among those topics, renewable energy and energy efficiency in terms of corporate renewable energy procurement really is gaining ground in recent years. So that has become a greater and greater focus. And I think it just underlines the fact we are talking a lot about the investor approach today, but that certainly is a big part of it. And really, this is a multi-sector, multi-actor approach to reaching those goals. So I did want to highlight that another way that we're looking at it across kind of that investor-corporate dialogue, which is really critical, is looking at exactly that, looking at kind of ESG disclosure and looking at different types of sustainability disclosures from public companies in particular. So Series just recently released a new report to that effect called Change the Conversation, and really looking to make that more of a proactive, two-way conversation rather than more of a reactive one. And I think there are certainly different challenges facing companies, public companies, on disclosure, and certainly many new frameworks that have been released in recent years. Series was very active, for example, in the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, stood up by former Mayor Bloomberg and Mark Carney, the Bank of England. So looking at kind of those sorts of efforts, I think that is a critical piece of it in terms of when we talk about driving impact and really driving towards more of a renewable energy investment and low carbon transition. And then the final just overarching point, and calling on a couple of other of our members of our network, just again retrospectively at one of the, I guess, older institutions happens to be at the table here today. Looking back over the 30 years of Series history, very much when Series was founded, it was to counter the idea that climate risks, that sustainability risks are off-balance sheet risks. They're clearly not. And just looking at this sea change, maybe not in capital transition yet, unfortunately, as we've seen in the B and EF numbers, but certainly in terms of investor awareness. And just this past Friday in the New York Times, there was an article to that effect, in that as we look at driving impact across different asset classes, I think one of the key drivers is really both on an institutional and individual perspective, that investors are really looking for this information and this progress. And we see that in kind of the millennials, especially as we look at rolling there, but really across the board. The 2 of our members quoted in that article, Green Century Capital Management and then Wellington Management, which has newly joined the series investor network, just underlining that trend. And I think as we look at impact across asset classes, across sectors, across that investor corporate dialogue, I think that certainly is a very positive tailwind going forward.
Great. So shifting quickly to the private markets, and John, if you might like to respond to the impact opportunity. You've already touched upon also this nexus back to social equity, community resilience, and community engagement. And I wonder if you could keep that in mind here to shift the conversation in that direction. I also just want to do a time check. We're 3:15 right now, and our aim is to finish at 3:30. So
at least the webinar portion.
For the webinar portion. So what I may do after John and Johanna respond to the impact question, that we may turn it over to some questions that we're getting from the webinar. So if you do have any questions, those of you on the webinar, please use the chat box to present those, and my colleague Christy Electris can pose some of those and at least get them on the table. For those of you who are in person or sticking around, we're happy to kind of close the webinar and continue the dialogue in person for a few minutes before we go get drinks and do the tour. The tour doesn't start until 4:30. So let's just do that in consideration for those of you who are dialing in. So turn it over to John.
Sure. So what we offer to our investors is both uncorrelated asset classes, but also incremental impact. And we count that incremental impact in a couple ways. When we look at the solar market and its growth and where it's heading, is residential is going like this, large commercial and utility scale is going like this. And the underserved middle market has been relatively stagnant. So as a solar project developer, I could drive by certain areas and look at fields and rooftops and say, there's going to be solar on that. I didn't need to do anything to make that happen. But you can also look at certain rooftops and know, traditional investors don't like those projects because they're small, they may have perceptions, false perceptions around the credit behind the off-taker on those projects, and that's where Sunwealth comes in. And what we are able to do is make incremental impact, not just around carbon reduction, but around who gets to install those solar projects. Typically, small businesses have a hard time getting underwritten by traditional financing, creating jobs for those entities. And then the other thing, which is core to our underwriting and to our business, is that we underwrite and model each deal so that all of our customers or energy off-takers or hosts get clear and meaningful energy savings, whether it's the Epiphany School or Equinix and everyone in between on those projects. So Jess just texted me some stats, of course. So last year we invested $15 million, and we can empirically model that that's going to provide our energy customers with $9 million in savings. So think of that. For every dollar that someone invests in us, more than 50 cents goes to create energy savings for great community organizations. That also creates $12 million in revenue for our local installation partners. And it's 185 job years that are created over the life of this project. And it's also 140,000 metric tons of carbon reduction. And people say, well, how do you know all this? And we are fortunate enough that solar is one of the easiest things to measure. We can count jobs, and we can measure kilowatt hours in real time, just logging into the system on the roof. It's pretty straightforward to model production from a solar project. It's not rocket scientists, though. Rocket scientists have developed the models. And over time, it's easy to monitor as well. And we know with our track record and our experience beforehand that there's, basically we're on track to meet all of our models on all these projects.
That's great. That's really helpful within the project finance space. Again, both private debt and tax equity financing. Johanna, on the philanthropic side.
Sure, and I'll try to be quick. I know we're trying to get to questions. So first, in terms of venture capital in general on the impact question, so a question that often gets asked at panels with VC types around who are impact investors is, can you have both impact and returns? It's kind of like this popular question. And it's a little silly because I think the answer is definitely yes. Many people have demonstrated that. The reason I find it frustrating is because from a climate perspective, it's not necessarily the right question, because you can have impact. you as a venture investor can demonstrate great returns to your LPs and be having some impact, but whether or not it's optimal impact and like what the climate needs is a separate question. And so I think where the venture capital class needs to really grow up around impact is evaluating, is this where we can have the most impact? And that's something that we are actually fortunate in having a philanthropic angle. We not only can ask that, but feel it's our duty to ask, are we investing in something that is optimally impactful and would not happen without us? And so I'm not suggesting that, that exact lens can be applied to other venture funds, but I think what's lacking is that eye toward optimal impact, because in my opinion, if what we care about is, greenhouse gas emissions reduction, it's not enough to just say, am I having an impact? I mean, we could do better than that. In terms of what we provide to our investors and how we evaluate impact, it's really on a per company basis. So when we're evaluating an early stage company for potential seed or Series A investment, we'll look at the product that is envisioned to be offered. And this is always very forward looking for us, as Ash alluded to, because these companies are way pre-deployment, pre-revenue. And so we'll evaluate, if this company is successful. So a good example, an air conditioning company that we supported called Tro, who has a novel heat exchanger material in their air conditioner, which can be not only much more efficient, but allows them to construct an air conditioner that has water cooling instead of very high emitting refrigerants that leaks and emits to the atmosphere. So we can say, well, for every air conditioner deployed, when this company starts to deploy to customers, this is the envisioned avoided GHG impact. And then we model that out and evaluate, here's how many in developing markets, here's what we'll be buying air conditioners and so on. Subtract off what we think will happen anyway based on, the regulations around these units. And only if we see a pathway toward gigaton scale impact, after doing all that modeling, will we then proceed to make an investment. And so, we're very transparent about that, and our investors can have that confidence. And then that also becomes kind of our guide. Once we invest in a company and we sit on the board, we're evaluating them on that basis, and we're evaluating ourselves on that basis. Are we shepherding this company to a point where they're deploying this product that we envisioned could have this type of impact? And that's part of the reporting that we provide back to our investors.
Great, it's really helpful. So with about 10 minutes left in the webinar portion, I wondered if I could turn it over to our team to see if there are any questions coming in.
Not yet. I think we're waiting to hear the discussion.
Well, with that, I would like to open it up to the in-person audience here to join this conversation more directly. And I don't know who you are. Please announce yourself. So would anybody like to pose a question to bring into the discussion here? Yes, say who you are, please.
Hi, so I'm just back to like what you were mentioning about moving from asset classes to more like impact classes. If we go that direction, how would each of the panelists, describe their impact classes? If we're shifting the portfolio allocation, and modern portfolio theory into rethinking, impact classes. What are your thoughts on that, and how would each one of them fit into impact classes? Great.
Rather than take each individual question, I'd like to get a whole series of questions on the table. That way we can kind of bundle in and reflect accordingly. So other questions? Please.
Tori Diedelhouse with Diedel and Partners. Jonathan, you really spoke to sort of the social justice externalities and the pieces that you're working on. I'd be curious to hear from the rest of you whether you're hearing from your investors, whether people are asking about how are you thinking about other social justice outcomes and what you think about impact.
Thank you. Other folks? Anything on the Zoom?
I do have a couple on the Zoom now.
Yeah, go ahead.
From Christina Herman, financial support for a transition to a clean energy economy is extremely important. So she thanks us for the gathering. And the work we're doing. ICCR is looking at just transition issues and trying to understand how to ensure transition is good for communities and workers, and they're concerned about lower wages and health and safety standards in the renewable energy industry, so if folks could comment on that as well. Specifically, what investors are making clean energy investments, what investors making clean energy investments can do to promote a just transition.
Any others? just to get them on the table. So one other one, building upon that, since Tori's asked along these lines, Christina sort of amplified the point. I think in our collective discussion prior to the roundtable, a question emerged even more pointedly around the degree to which the clean energy transition or the clean energy revolution may in fact be magnifying social inequality in some respects, rather than actually, tempering it, to say nothing of actually flipping it and addressing it explicitly. So I wonder if folks have asset class rooted observations around that. Yeah, we've got a series of questions on the table. So kind of curious, I might ask you, just because it's been a while since you've intervened in the conversation, would you like to start?
I would say, no, I don't think this issue of just transition has been clearly brought out yet. And I know professors are working on getting satellite imagery to figure out if there is a systematic way in which disenfranchised communities are not getting solar, but I don't think that has been communicated to a broader group yet. On asset classes, impact asset classes, I would say on the financial side, there are some investors that are starting to break their portfolios down based on risk factors. There can be a potential impact overlay on top of that, but we are starting to ask these questions with our public equity managers who are saying we have these thematic allocations in our portfolio. So then the natural question would be, if you are, then okay, like you measure it across time, what's the correlations of these impact themes that you do, and there's not a clear answer.
That's interesting. Others, without any particular order, just based on some of what you've heard. Yeah, Liz, please.
I can go. So I think maybe tying many of these questions together, I like where you started the question about thinking about impact classes, and if you take a step away from whatever the definition of impact classes is, if such a thing exists. So personally, for me, the way that I got interested in this whole field back when I was a youngster in school was thinking, okay, the climate is changing, and big businesses broadly caused this problem. They're going to have to solve it. How can I dedicate my career to that? And so one of the answers certainly is, investing in the companies that are providing the solutions. But another way of contributing to that solution is through the work that Trillium's advocacy team does, as I was mentioning earlier, making companies who have caused problems, broadly speaking, cause solutions, broadly speaking. So depending on how you think about about impact classification, if you're thinking from the top level, these corporations that are employing, when you think about the public equity markets, the corporations that are employing so many people, how can we get them to contribute? And so, one of the things that we think about at Trillium is that you can't just look at one factor in isolation. You can't look at just climate change. You can't have just a gender lens. You have to think about the whole thing together. So one of the areas that we are interested in is human capital management. So when you've got corporations that you could imagine a corporation who is providing, the ultimate renewable energy, say like the world's best solar panel, but treating their employees quite terribly. And so we would say that's not just, let's do some work, let's pester this company and get them to improve. Before we even invested, if we would invest, we'd be looking at how they treat their workers. That's one of the reasons that we do a lot of work around reporting on workforce composition, for example. So just trying to think about how we need corporations to look and to work in order to solve these global problems, and trying to do it all within the same framework.
Peter, sticking in the public markets, do you have a reaction to some of that?
We tried to, not measure, but categorize our sector by impact, mostly the SDGs, which I sort of had this love-hate relationship with. But I do think on the municipal issuer side, very often those purposes these projects do align with an impact which aligns with sustainable development goals. So we've done that, and then we just, we've really struggled with reporting and trying to give investors a clear, we do think that ESG integration ultimately, if it's done well and broadly adapted, that's the holy grail, in that we get management of companies will they will respond to an issue if the markets respond to it. The problem is markets and investors aren't. So that we do a lot of work, to better. We're reporting, because we used to hand people portfolios, and we do a lot of work in our security selection, taking account of ESG and impact, and then we just hand them the portfolio, and that doesn't suffice. So we've done a lot of work to give them more data and more commentary on each of our holdings. So I think transparency is a good, that's been our strategy.
Yeah, that's helpful. Swinging to the private markets, to conclude, maybe Johanna first.
Sure. Couple of quick thoughts. I love the question around impact classes. Maybe two ways to think about stratifying it. One would be based on additionality. So, the extent to which something would be done on its own with the markets without an impact lens, versus the extent to something would not be done. Similar but different would be just around an optimal impact. And of course, to do that, you can only do that if you decide on a metric to prioritize. And what I'm hearing around the table is that that's challenging in many portfolios. I think with a very focused fund like ours, we're comfortable doing that, where our first filter is potential for GHG emission reduction. And then underneath that, when we, in the fullness of considering an investment, we'll think about other factors like water impacts or community impacts or diversity impacts and that kind of thing. So those would be, two approaches I might pose.
John? Sure. So in terms of class, I think that the way I'd answer this question is that we need to think really hard about how we define impact investing. And right now there's a huge amount of asset classes and types of investment that are included under it. I would make an argument that for us to be successful at impact investing, that at least a generation from now, it needs to be both walking and chewing bubble gum at the same time. So it can't just be about carbon mitigation. It should be about carbon mitigation plus addressing social issues at the same time. And then, clean energy transition, magnifying, perpetuating social injustice. That is a loaded question. I have tons of empirical evidence saying, yes, it absolutely is. One of the main ones I can quote is, here in Massachusetts, we take great pride in our community solar programs and the amount of penetration has gotten in the market. So, approximately 30–40% of all solar in the state is supported by community solar. And here's what's interesting is that show me one of those community solar customers that has a FICO score less than 700, and I'll be impressed. And so there is huge perpetuation of social injustice in the way we develop projects, the way we finance them, the way we do it. Solar is good. All solar is good, but we can do a little bit better.
That's helpful. Linda, not to put you on the spot, but I think you have the last word here. Again, from a multi-asset class and asset owning perspective, and as an important field builder in the space.
Sure. I guess sequentially, addressing whether we are being focused from our investor network, and I would say also our company network, which is very interwoven in terms of kind of the S of ESG and looking at just transition. I would say definitely the answer to that is yes. And to the extent that we've actually set up a new working group, the Just Transition Working Group, that is a result of that increasing investor interest. One, beyond Boston for a moment, one issue that has really come to the forefront is on our company network side in particular is looking at issues of forced labor and supply chains and human rights abuses. So those are beyond our traditional climate focus, but certainly very related in many ways, issues that series is working to address. And then I guess in the overarching framework or reclassification question, to Peter's point, I think we're also seeing a increasing interest in the UN SDGs and investor focus there. I think the positive of that is that there's a common framework and kind of language. That one of the challenges of that is that they're not necessarily constructed, all of them, the 17 to be as granular and investable. So there's certainly a lot of challenge around that, as well as concern about possible SDG washing, which is key to look at as well. But we are seeing increased interest there, and certainly a lot of conversation around those 17 goals. So I think that's something that we'll continue to see going forward. In terms of kind of tying it all together across asset classes, I think what we're seeing really is that, and I think we saw this in the numbers in terms of renewable energy investment, is that progress is not necessarily linear year over year in terms of renewable energy. And one topic we haven't talked about today, but I know Greentown has done some great events on, is also the policy landscape. The series is working across a number of different states, in particular, in terms of really leveling that playing field, and that certainly is a critical piece of the equation from both the investor and corporate dimensions.
Super. I think that's a great place to finish, because policy is exactly one of those issues where every investor, regardless of asset class, has an opportunity to engage and to see really important impacts associated with that, because regulation plays just an immensely important role in the renewable energy economy. So with that, I know we're just beyond our time here at the bottom of the hour, so I would like to draw the webinar portion of this to a close. And Christina, you might want to advance the last slide. If folks would like to be in touch with the Croatan Institute team about this and future events that the Clean Portfolio Project will be doing, we'd love for you to reach out to us in that vein. And let me just conclude again by thanking John and his team at Sunwell, Jess Brooks in particular, I know isn't here, but Jess and Ryan for facilitating this setting, which is really, really dynamic and great. We really appreciate it. Thanks again to Greentown Labs. Also want to thank my other team members who are here. Bill Harrington is here, Senior Fellow from New York, the Electress, who's behind the camera, and Jamie Silverstein, also an associate on the Croatan team here in the Boston area. So thanks, everyone. And with that,